Greetings from Florida. I'm John Benedict. Benedict as in eggs, Benedict or benediction, whichever you choose. Um, I've lived in 7 states and find this Florida to be a great place to be. And one of the best reasons is because so many good people from other states come here. Let me let me start to talk by telling you about our Bible study leader. His name is Joe, and Joe was telling the other day about his history of managing production, and he learned from a mentor, his uncle, that you want to be relational. And so he did that with the people that worked for him. He was interested in them personally. He brought treats. He asked them how they were doing, etc. And because of that, they liked him, and he was a good manager anyway. So he was very successful. And in fact, he was so successful he was able to retire early. Mentoring is a very important thing that we all should have. Looking back on my life, I can't think of a single mentor that I had. I learned it the hard way, I think, and sometimes it was too late that I could use that information. It's a fine art, and I wrote a book, and I believe the book has a mentoring purpose to it because it helps everyone to live a more abundant life. John 10:10 says, I came that they might have life and that they might have it abundantly. If you look at the cover of my book, you'll see a big glass of sparkling water. Water is life, and the glass is abundantly full. This book is very much like a mentoring book. Um, For example, we have a chapter on marriage, and in the chapter on marriage, I list 12 reasons which you can interpret as vows for getting married. It's a much more detailed, much better understanding of just saying to heaven to hold until death do us part. So it's a learning process just in the vows that I've listed. Then also, I talked a little bit about living together before marriage, which is, not necessarily a Christian attribute, but 50% of the people nowadays live together before they get married, including Christians. So it's something that needs to be discussed, and I do discuss it. But the most important item in the marriage book is if your marriage runs into trouble, what are the options? So that's the kind of book that I've written, and it's a mentoring book in that respect. First of all, why am I qualified to write a book? You can't very well write a book if you're not qualified. And if anybody says, I wrote a book, well, okay. There has to be a reason for you to read what is written. And that sometimes becomes by reputation, but other times it becomes just your judgment about whether it might be interesting. First of all, my age. I'm 88 years old. God's been good to me. Good health, good energy. And I not only am 88 years old, but I've lived a very adventurous life. But don't count me short because I am 88, because I have energy. To start, may I first cite two common ways of learning. The first is by experience. Nothing is remembered as well as experience. A toddler touches a stove, okay, that's experience, and he doesn't touch one anymore. I've touched a lot of stoves. Elderly people are more cautious because they've touched a lot of stoves. So experience is a good way to learn, a very permanent way to learn. But the trouble with that is that if you fall off a cliff, there's no second chance. And so you might apply that to today's life common experiences, for example, losing a job, a divorce, your children growing up and going in the wrong direction. Those are all experiences that's really hard to change. The second way of learning is by reading or hearing from someone who has had experience. We can all find someone to give us advice. It's just amazing how many people are happy to give us advice. But you got to find somebody with wisdom and who knows God's word and lives a life that is worthy of giving advice. And you can't be limited just to one person. You can use one, two, or more counselors, but make sure they're qualified to advise you on what you should be doing or done. I have to tell you that I've been going to the same dentist for a long time, and suddenly I just felt I ought to go to another dentist. Well, I wound up going to two more dentists, and I was amazed how much more I learned. More doctors, more dentists. I mean, they're not all the same, let's face it. One thing that has happened to me recently that's been an eye-opening adventure for me is that I go to a Bible study, and we have a Bible lesson that we learn from, and they have questions. And I finally got really tired of the whimsical questions and the speculative questions. Let me tell you what I mean by that. In John chapter 21, there's a story about Peter seeing Jesus and Jesus asking him those three questions. Do you love me? And the author decided, out of a whim, to make that lesson a lesson on forgiveness. Well, forgiveness is not mentioned in the Bible, in that chapter. In fact, the lesson could very well be aimed at Christ qualifying Peter to go out into the world and start the Christian church. I mean, that's a big deal, is it not? So that is a whimsical idea. Speculative questions. Well, here's the speculative questions. How do you think Peter felt as seeing Jesus again? Well, who knows? And is it important? Not really. You'll never know the answer to that. Nobody will. What we need to focus on is what the Bible says and what it speaks to us about. How did I decide to write this book? Well, one day I wrote something. I don't even know exactly what part of my life I wrote, but I just kept writing, and I wound up with 130 pages. Actually, it's a pretty brief book. My defense, I must tell you that I rather not read 400 pages to get 50 pages of information. I like to have it more condensed, and that's why it's only 130 pages, but I can make a book out of every chapter if I wanted to. It is not an autobiography, but lessons that I've learned from my 88 years of experience. I learned many important principles in my life, many times too late to correct what I did. The book about what I should have done is not only what I did, but what I should have done. Let me give you an overview of my adventurous life. First of all, I need to tell you that I was baptized in 1 or 2 weeks of age, and I went to church every Sunday, all my life, including college. And I heard about 4,500 sermons, and I remember them all. Not really, but I don't hear anything new very often. I was raised on a small farm. My dad was a farmer, and believe it or not, he was still farming with horses back in those days. I remember we would go through a cornfield with the wagon to throw corn into, and we shuck the corn and throw it into the wagon. The horses will pull it, and all he had to do is say, "Giddy up," and the horses would go another 10 feet. So it was a very old way of doing things. There was no running water in the house. We had outdoor toilets. Don't ask me what we used for toilet paper. We had a dirt road. So to go to church when it was snowy or rainy could be a challenge. Get stuck, whatever. And I went to an 8th grade, one-room schoolhouse my first 5 years of schooling. It was the best 5 years of schooling that I had, by the way. It was had a phenomenal teacher, and I learned to read and write and everything, which is hard for people nowadays, it seems, to learn. In high school, there were 13 in my graduating class, and that's considered pretty small, right? I really lived an isolated life because I was on a farm 2 miles from town. There were no kids to play with. There was no swimming pool. In Nebraska, it's hard to get wet. There was no baseball, no little league, nothing like that. My dad came from a somewhat wealthy family, and he went to 1 year of college, very unusual in that era for him to go to college, but he went. But unfortunately, he had to come home after only a year or two because his dad contracted rheumatoid arthritis, which is a debilitating disease. It's really makes it almost impossible to work. And at the same time, my grandpa lost most of his fortune because of the Depression. Well, my dad wanted me to go to college. No wonder, right? And I thought, okay, but what is college? I don't know. The only people I knew that that went to college was pastors, teachers, and doctors. No one else. But my coach told me I ought to take engineering. I didn't know what engineering was, but he said, you're good at math. It might be something good for you to take. So I took math. I took electrical engineering. And I chose electrical, by the way, arbitrarily. I had no idea what it was, and so I took it. Well, I kept with it. That's what is the way I was brought up and the way I live most of my life is no matter whether it's right or wrong, you just keep going to get it done and do it. Be loyal to it. I could have used a mentor, though, because it was the wrong course for me. And I got mediocre grades. I got mediocre grades because I had mediocre interest in the courses. Well, when I graduated, I still had no idea what I was going to do. And I got only one offer, and that was for sales engineering. Sales engineering, what is that? In college, they don't teach you about jobs. They just teach you math courses and things like that. And don't you know, God, I think, led me to that activity. As I've often said, God can make cheesecake out of skim milk. Well, I began my job training in St. Louis, and it was not good training at all. And then they sent me to Cleveland to the branch office. And I was there for a couple of years, and I was getting nowhere. And finally decided I got to do something different. So I went out and found a job at Honeywell, and it was a perfect job for me. They had great training. They had great support. There were other salesmen to work with. It was super. And in a matter of 10, 12 years, I had gone from a rookie salesman to a branch manager in charge of 40 people. And it took me from, it was a moving job. It took me from Cleveland to Detroit to Charleston, West Virginia to Minneapolis. And very successful in Minneapolis until they had a reorganization. They changed the whole thing, which companies sometimes do. Instead of managing, they change the organization. And my new job was not very fulfilling. In fact, it was boring. So I decided to change again. And of all things, I took a job as a salesman for a small company. The owner was a rich man because he had worked, 6 10s or 7 10s all his life. He had 13 children, so you knew he didn't work all the time. And but he was very frugal with a capital F. My desk, my chair had no casters on it, would you believe? And the desk had splinters, so I could ruin my tie if I leaned forward too much. But anyway, what was interesting about it is that my income as a salesman was double that of my income as a branch manager of 40 people. Amazing, isn't it? Well, I worked at that for 3 years, and then I started up my own company. And it grew from one man, one desk to 25 people. And that didn't happen easily. It was a lot of hard work and a lot of challenges. By my mid-1990s were adventurous. Talk about adventurous. In 3 years, I received an unexpected divorce after 35 years of marriage and 5 grandchildren. I had prostate surgery for cancer. I lost the company I grew for 20 years, and I had a bout with depression. The big four. Being in my late 50s, divorce was an emotional experience. It took a while to get over that. Losing the company that I had spent 50, 60-hour weeks building was a shock, but no choice. I just had to put my head down and keep going. Dealing with cancer was not a big deal because I was so busy, I didn't have time to get worried about it. Having depression was a learning experience. My life definitely took a big turn in those 3 years. But there was a blessing in losing the company. Would you believe the funny thing about losing a battle is that's another way to have peace? When you don't have a battle, you have peace. And I found peace for the first time, and I began to understand to let go and let God. Letting go is a very important part of life. You have to keep working, have faith, and move ahead, but you have to believe that God will take care of the results. The results are in His hands. Don't worry about it. That won't get you home for lunch, worrying about it. A word about depression. Some people ask, which of the 4 crises were the toughest? To most people's surprise, I say depression. I'm so glad that I went through it because I can only describe it as black. That's the primary word. No hope, no joy, no peace. I learned why people commit suicide. But I came out of it after 3 months. How? I had to work my 50, 60 hours a week, so I was really busy. I went dancing 4 nights a week, and so I didn't have much time to be depressed. Going home was terrible. I had a hard time sleeping. And if I went someplace that didn't have this kind of focus, I was really in trouble. But I kept going. And then I discovered Isaiah 43:18, which says, "Forget the former things. Do not dwell on the past. I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I'm making a way in the desert and streams in the wasteland." So God had great plans for me. Also, there was a woman in a charismatic church that I went to at one time, and she was the most spiritual woman I'd ever known. So I went to her and asked her to pray for me, and she did. And don't you know, in a week or two, the depression went away. It went away with no doctors, no medication, and no funny farm. Losing the company was a shock financially. I went from a bit of wealth to a net worth of minus $600,000. I spent 6 months liquidating the company and planned my future. 60 is not a good age to go to work for someone else. So I decided to start up another company with no money. My son-in-law and I spent 6 months liquidating the company and starting up the new one. Neither one of us had any money, and I owed the government $600,000. My lifestyle changed. I earned $10,000 to $20,000 a year. For several years, I bought church shirts at Goodwill, things like that, saved money any way I could. But we were blessed. We survived, and after 10 years, we were on our feet, doing well. With a new company, I will continue to work my 50, 60 hours, and I was 80 eventually, because I worked for 20 years to rebuild it. And I thought that when this happened, I would be working all my life. I'd never have enough to really retire. But after 20 years, I was comfortable financially again, and I was able to cut back somewhat, and I had enough money to live well, and eventually I never gave up working. I still do some part-time work, but I moved to Florida, and I just had a great time living there. Other than work in my life, you can tell that I was a workaholic. What else did I do? I played basketball in a league. I coached a little league, baseball, basketball, and football. Followed sports and politics. I'm a political junkie. I joined Bible study fellowship that took almost 5 hours a week, and I did that for 5 years. I had my nose in the Bible most of the time, and one day someone said, "You've changed." I didn't know it, but the Bible will do that to you. I've lived in 14 different homes and gone to 16 different churches. I've served in about every way possible except as a pastor or music director, even though I have a lovely voice. I taught Sunday school for 30 years, some adult education, finance committee, elder, deacon, basketball coach, usher, did about all of them. Along the way, I made a lot of mistakes, but the Lord kept blessing me. And now I live in Lee County, Florida, 1.5 million people. After living in 5 major cities, not counting Lincoln and Omaha when I was going to college. So from an isolated life on a small farm to living in 5 major cities, starting 2 companies, having all these crises that rise, I think you can say that I've had quite a life. Adventurous life is the word I use. I lived in a beautiful home on a Cape Coral Canal for a while, but circumstances changed, so I moved to a less expensive home, and that's one blessing I have. You know, I was raised with low expectations, and when you have low expectations, you don't need a big house. You don't need a big car. You're happy with what you've got. I have to tell you my dance story. My book had a chapter on recreation, and until I started dancing in 1994 after my divorce, I never had an appreciation for recreation. It came alive and saved me in many ways. Dancing fulfilled so many of my needs, relationships, music, therapy, athletic and aerobic activity, freedom from work, exercise, all in a clean place that had no addictive temptations. I've met many people, and they became a part of my life. The dance community is like a family. I had a family in Minnesota. I have a family in Lee County now. In Minnesota, one of my most frequent dancers lived with a lady, and she went on a vacation. And when she came back, she found he had died a week ago, and nobody knew. And he had no family, and he had no priest, never went to church. So we put together a funeral home memorial service. And don't you believe that it was packed? I don't know why it's emotional for me, but it was packed with dancers. What a wonderful family the dancing community is. By the way, I have handicaps in my life. One of them is my hearing. Let me give you an example of what it's like to have partial hearing. I was going through security at the airport, waiting to go through the X-ray machine. A lady shouts over to me from behind the machine, "Do you have any metal in your pants?" What? She says, "Do you have any metal in your pants?" I knew it wasn't going to get any better, so I said no. And I went through the X-ray machine, and I went up to her and I said, "What do you mean, do I have any metal in my pants?" She says, "Oh, no." She says, I said, "Do you have any metal implants?" So we that have hearing issues have a lot of funny things happen to us. Before I close, let me talk briefly about the book. First, you must know that this is not an autobiography. It is about 95% of my life, describing what I did right and what I would have done if I had known. Here are a few samples of the book. There are practical chapters: education, work, marriage, family, risk, finances, and health. Finances and health are two very important chapters. They should be mandatory in every school at every age. Spiritual chapters: evil, sin, fellowship, aging, finding the Holy Spirit, prayer, and heritage. I love heritage. It isn't about money. It's not about leaving your bank account. It's about leaving your heart values. I'm using heritage in that context. If you were here, I would ask what chapter you would like me to just give you a brief description of. I'll choose character. Then we'll be done and we are free to go eat dinner or a walk or whatever. Character cites the important issues. Honesty. I discuss the devastating problem of lying. Why does it happen and what does it do to your life? Discipline. The reason so many people don't achieve much in life is lack of discipline. Discipline is a mindset, and without it, your life will be mediocre at best. Goals in your life. Without hope and direction, you won't have much hope for a fruitful life. Listening. One of my favorite subjects. Ever been around someone that does all the talking? What does that do? First of all, the speaker doesn't learn a thing. Secondly, the listener will get bored and have to be polite to endure. A very unsatisfactory experience for both. However, I will not let someone kidnap my ears. It's against the law, my law. How do I stop it? Interrupt and ask questions. Interrupting is perfectly fine. The talker is the one who is impolite. When they say something on which you would like to comment or change a subject, ask a question. Interrupt them, ask questions. Then, too, questions will guide a conversation so that you can control the talker instead of the talker controlling you. The final item is very interesting about humor and crying. Did you know that humor and crying are both extremely good for your health? I list multiple ways that it helps. Did you know crying has more benefits than laughter? 12-6. Yes, it is okay for men to cry. In fact, crying is a very strong characteristic for men, and women love men who cry. Well, that is it, folks. Hope you gained something from this. To read my book, look up Encyclopedia for the Abundant Life by John Benedict. Available at all the major sources: Amazon, Walmart, Barnes & Noble, Kindle, etc. You can also see my interview with Logan Crawford on YouTube and many other media outlets. Contact me if you have questions or concerns at JB, J as in John, B as in boy, at BEC, Boy Edward Charles Corp, CORP.com. I'm also available to speak at groups relating to this book and my life. With that, thanks for watching, and may God bless all of you.